Bienvenidos a la Biblioteca Benjamin Franklin. El día de hoy presentamos a Donika Kelly, importante referente de la literatura estadounidense, quien escribió el poemario Renunciations y ganadora de varios premios entre los que destacan el Anna Field Wolf Book Award en Poetry y Bestiary. Agradecemos también a la red de American Spaces que se encuentran transmitiendo este evento alrededor del país y a todas las personas que nos ven a través de Facebook Live. Pueden dejar sus preguntas en los comentarios. Recuerda suscribirte a nuestro boletín de notificaciones y estar pendiente de nuestras redes sociales para enterarte de todas nuestras actividades. Comenzamos.
Thank you. Good afternoon. How are you? Thank you for coming today. Thank you guys that you are here just so happy to practice English, and maybe we are going to not in this activity we are not going to write, but you will be listening some poetry. Gracias por venir. Vamos ahora, hemos tenido en varios eventos ya a Donika y ella nos va a leer el día de hoy algo de sus poemas. But I just want to mention for those that are in Facebook, we are streaming this through Facebook, and if you have any questions, you can leave the questions in the video, and we are going to answer those questions. Well, I want to introduce Donika Kelly. She's coming from US, but she stopped by the Cervantino Festival that it's happening right now in Guanajuato, and they are honoring US. So thank you for coming. You are going to introduce a little bit of yourself, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so thank you, Donika, for coming. Thank you.
Oh. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Can you hear me okay? Okay. Excellent, excellent. My name is Donika Kelly. I'm a poet. I've written 2 books of poetry. Both of them are sad. I'm gonna read some sad poems today, but maybe not too sad, just a little sad. I currently teach at the University of Iowa, which is in Iowa, City, Iowa. It's a lot of Iowa. I also today, I'm gonna read for maybe about 20 minutes or so. I feel like that's a good amount of time to listen. Even in the US, people get a little tired after 20 minutes of listening. So I'll read for about 20 minutes. I do have, there's a handout coming around. I'm gonna read 3 poems that are translated into Spanish. So I'll be reading them in English because my Spanish is not good. But I thought it might be nice to have some poems that, if it felt kind of hard to follow along in English, you could sort of see what I was talking about in Spanish. And I think the translations are really, really wonderful. I'm trying to think of what else. So a lot of my poems deal with or use mythology, Greek mythology. I will explain to you what some of the creatures are or some of the gods are that I talk about in the poem to help frame that. Also, there are a lot of animals in my poems, just so many animals, and I don't know why. That's just what my spirit likes. Okay. So I thought I would start with the first poem that you have the handout for. And let me pull it up here. Okay. So the poem is titled Out West, and it's from my first book. So you have it in Spanish here. Out West. Refuse the old means of measurement. Rely instead on the thrumming wilderness of self. Listen, you have been lost for some time, taking comfort in being home to any wandering thing. Sheep and brown cows graze your heart pocket. Antelope and bison lap the great lake of your eye, and in your ear the black bear winters. You name your dawn shadow, rabbit. You name your dusk shadow, spur. And the river that cuts you as it runs west, you name it persistence. Look, if you could bear sobriety, you'd be sober. If you could bear being a person, you would no longer be an iron bluff. Do not wander. We are all apportioned a certain measure of stillness. What does that even mean? I always wonder, I get to the end and I'm like, what is this poem about? And I think it's about being still. I think it's about slowing down. But sometimes I get to the end and I think, okay. Okay, so the next poem, you also have this one. It's called Catalog. And it has a reference to Walt Whitman. Okay, so catalog. You think about being small, a child. No, smaller, a bird. Smaller still, a small bird. You think about the art of holding, of being held. This hand can crush you, pulp and feather you, could release the air from all your little bones. You grow. You are large. You are a 19th century poem. All of America is inside you, a catalog of lives and land and burrowing things. You contain your beloved, a field, a building of softening wood, the birds, always the birds. Soon you will be a person. Nothing will change. Your body will be of a piece with all other bodies. The thrush, the dormouse, the great black bear. When you open your mouth, there will be only air. Tighten your throat, sound inexplicably like something lost. So it's gonna be a minute before I read the last poem. So the next set of poems that I'm gonna read to you are about breaking up. I was married and then we got a divorce, and it was sad, but also it was okay. Things end. Oh, no. I just thought you might have a question. That's okay. So the first poem that I want to read from this book, this is my second book. It's called The Renunciations. So I'm going to read probably like 5 or 6 poems from this book, and the last one I will read. The second to last one that I'll read will be the one that is the last page of the handout. So, and I'll let you know when I get to that one. So this is called Bedtime Story for the Bruised Hearted. This poem takes up the myth of Apollo and Daphne in Greek mythology. So Apollo was the god of wisdom, of song, of light, and he was also very bad at taking no for an answer because he was a god. Daphne was a river nymph, so her father was a river god and she was one of his children. And Apollo was chasing her. Apollo, this god, was like, he wanted her for his own. And she did not want him because she was running away. It was very clear. She was like, no. Right before she's so close to her father, but Apollo is catching up with her. So she's running, Apollo's behind her. She's close to the river. If she can get to the river, she'll be safe, but she doesn't quite get there. So her father, the river god, changes her into a tree. This happens a couple times in Greek mythology. There'll be a god chasing a nymph, like a beautiful girl, and then her father, who is a lesser god, will turn her into a plant. I don't know why this is a motif in Greek mythology. I don't know what they were doing. But one of the things that happens with Daphne is she's turned into a laurel tree, and Apollo takes a branch from that tree and makes it into a crown for himself. So even though he couldn't have her the way he wanted her, he was like, I'm still gonna take something from you. And that myth informs this poem. So this poem is titled Bedtime Story for the Bruised Hearted. The trees were all women once, fleeing a god wedded with lust, until their fathers changed them, bound their bodies in bark, and still the god took a branch to crown his own head, reeds to hold his breath. How like them, our fathers, those small gods who unearthed their children with rage, who scored the bark and bent the branch to bind their bodies with our own. Tonight, my love, we are free of men, of gods, and I am a river against you, drawn to current and eddy, ready to make, to be unmade. So in this next poem, so my marriage was, the marriage that I write about in this book, it was on its way to ending. And I kind of knew, but I kind of didn't know. I kind of knew and I kind of didn't know. But I went on a writing retreat. I went away for a day to do some writing at a university called the College of St. Mary's. And after lunch, I went into the church on campus, the cathedral on campus. And one thing that is important to know, to come out in this poem, is that I don't believe in God, and it's not, I feel like my brain is too small to understand, and it's hard for me to understand things that I can't see. Like, this is a struggle on my part. So I'm not like, I am right. I'm just, this is where I am. But I was in this church, and I was just like sitting, and I noticed all of these little girls decorating the pews in the church, and they were wearing these beautiful dresses. And then I noticed they were sort of decorating the altar at the front of the church, and I was like, what's going on? And a wedding was about to happen. Like they were decorating the church for a wedding, and I was like, oh no. And then I ran away. So this is in the chapel of St. Mary's. I can't tell you what happened there, why I entered the sanctuary a non-believer, only that I have been thinking about worship, the altar of the body, and supplication for some time. My thoughts turn, as they often do in the season of absence, to my wife and how tired a God can get when called, and too often for little reason but loneliness. Of course, I don't mean God here, but rather the woman I love, who alters the orbit of my life, pulls me with the density of light toward her, the draw thinner when she is farther away, as she is now. I try to find comfort in the inevitability of science when what I lack is faith. The sanctuary, the stained glass, 4 girls saturating it with soft chatter, small pots of stargazer lilies, a lace ribbon for each pew. This place is full of faith in the unknown, and I don't know how to believe in what I cannot see. Tonight, I will drive through the foothills and into the valley. I will try to make a little practice to trust you are with me, even though you are somewhere else. I shouldn't have trusted y'all. I shouldn't have trusted her. It was a mistake. Or it wasn't a mistake. It was right. It was right to practice. Okay. All right. Okay, and this next poem, so the speaker in this poem is having a hard time. And the sense of the poem doesn't matter so much. I think what's important to know is just that the speaker is struggling, is trying to stay alive, but doesn't know if she'll be able to do it, right? All right, so this is called Hymn, Hymn, like the song. Hymn. Dear river, dear creek, dear dammed tributaries, dear fuse, dear dynamite and wet match, amen. The water don't love me and she don't love me, and maybe I'm drowning from the inside. Who put the river in my arms, said, don't let the water. Maybe the knife got a hard kiss and a sweet bite. Maybe the knife only metal and wood and a bit of brass, but maybe it know how to love the inside of me. Maybe I don't believe in meaning and God and plans and paths, and the closer I am to my animal self, the more human I am, the more I let myself break, like a wave, ocean in my arm, stone in my arm, iron and wood and brass, in my arm. Okay, so this next poem, so I knew it was almost over. I knew we were going to break up, but I had to go to my friends first. Do you ever do this? You're like, oh no, should I? Is this real? So I went to my friends, and I hadn't seen them in a long time. I was living in an isolated place, in a lonely place, and so I went to visit my friends in Texas. And my friend Jenny gave me a tarot reading. Do you know tarot? Tarot, it's like there are these cards, and each card has a meaning. Each card has a picture on it, and then there's a meaning for each of the cards. And depending on where the card is placed, the meaning applies to different parts of our lives, right? So my friend Jenny does tarot readings. This is what she does. And I knew that things were in a little bit of a bad place. And I said, Jenny, give me a tarot reading. And all of my friends were there. And you'll hear their names in the poem. And those friends are Jenny, Sid and Shannon, Amber, Joe, and Carlicia. So all of my friends are there. Jenny puts the cards out. And there's this one card. It's the Three of Swords. And the Three of Swords is a heart, but it's not like this, it's the muscle, right? And then there are 3 swords in the heart. And in that particular position, it suggested that perhaps somebody was cheating. Not me. Things happen, so. And so this happened in front of all of my friends, but this is a poem about going back to a place that I love and being with people I love who hold me warmly. So this is called Sighting Tarot, and it takes place in Pflugerville, Texas. I've learned how to hug here, how to draw a boundary and hold here against the gale force of my mother's late night rage and sob, learned too what it meant to be chosen, to choose, brought myself back to the receiving line, my chest cracked into 2 wet pieces after a fall so lonesome I wasn't sure I'd survive, and met the arms practiced in mending. I asked Jenny to read my cards, Sid and Shannon on the couch behind me, Amber and Joe in the kitchen, Nat in from Berkeley, the kids running around, Carlicia, I'm sure, at my right hand. Jenny spread the Celtic cross. That's a specific shape. Jenny spread the Celtic cross, gestured as she does, which is to say grandly, at my present, at the problems we all knew, the past, the conscious and unconscious, waited for the cards to name what we could all see there at the position of hopes and fears, 3 swords and 1 heart. How rude, I thought. Do y'all see this shit? I said aloud, the room gone quiet. A relief not to have to say what I had known in the room where I had learned the kind of love possible between friends, now family, the kindness possible between partners, grateful for the rough blow finally landed and the net to catch me. Okay, so 2 more poems. And then I thought, if you have questions, especially if you want to practice your English and you want to ask some very simple questions, that would be great. I'm happy to answer any level of question. There's some students here for the folks who are on Facebook. So the next poem I'll read is the last page on the handout. And this is kind of a weird poem. It seems like it's about an egg, which I guess it is. But maybe, I don't know. I know what this poem is about, but it's kind of hard to explain. So I'll just read the poem and maybe it'll make sense. So this is titled, A Dead Thing That, in Dying, Feeds the Living. I've been thinking about the anatomy of the egg, about the 2 interior membranes, the yolk held in place by the chalazi, gases moving through the semi-permeable shell. A curious phrase, the anatomy of the egg, as if an egg were a body, which it is, as if the egg could be broken, then mended, which, depending on your faith, broken, yes, but mended? Well, best to start again with a new body, voided from a warmer one, brooded and turned. Better to begin as if some small-handed animal hadn't knocked you against a rock, licked clean the rich yolk, and left the albumin to dry in the sun, as if a hinged jaw hadn't swallowed you whole. What I wanted, a practice that reassured that what was cracked could be mended, or at least suspended, so that it could not spread. But now I wonder, better to be the egg or scaled mandible, the small hand or the flies, the bottle black and green, spilling their bile onto whatever's left, sweeping the interior, drinking it clean. I think something might have grown there, though I know it was never meant to be eaten. It was always meant to spoil. And the last poem I read is one that I like the sounds in this poem. This poem came out of an exercise that another poet gave to me, the poet Gabrielle Calvo-Caresi. And it's a version of an exercise given by another poet. So it's like 2 poets removed. An exercise by the poet Rita Dove. And we had to use certain words in the poem. So like one of the words is blackberry. Another word is whir, like this noise, like, you know, like when something spins. And pony. I was like, I would never use these words in a poem altogether, but the exercise was fun and something interesting came out of it. And so this poem is titled, "The Moon Rose Over the Bay. I Had a Lot of Feelings." The home I've been making inside myself started with a raising, a brush clearing, the thorn and nettle, the blackberry bush falling under the bush hog. Then I rested, a cycle fallow, said winter, said the ground is too cold to break, pony, said I almost set fire to it all, lit a match, watched it ghost in the wind. Came the thaw, came the melting snowpack, the flooded river, new ground water, the well risen. I stood in the mud field and called it a pasture, stood with a needle in my mouth and called it a song. Everything rushed past my small ears, whir in the leaves, whir in the wing and the wood. About time to get a hammer, I thought. About time to get a nail and saw. Thank you so much. Thank you. My ears are very small. I don't know if y'all notice this. Do you see? They're very little. Can't put anything on them. So I'm happy to answer questions, any questions about writing, questions about those poems. I'm happy to chat, you know, about whatever y'all wanna talk about, whatever level of questions. And I think Claudia has a microphone. Okay. So does anyone have any questions?
Thank you. First of all, thank you for sharing all these points with us.
Thank you.
I feel that you are sharing part of your life,
Mm-hmm.
and I'd like to know if, with these poems, at some point, do you feel vulnerable, and how you handle that if is the case?
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Thank you for that question. I do feel vulnerable. It took me a long time to get to a place of being comfortable, being vulnerable with other people. I would say that didn't happen until I was like 25, like where I was like with a friend, like someone who I knew loved me. I was like, let me show you this little soft part right here. And it's been a really good journey practicing being vulnerable. And poems are one of the oldest places where I could be vulnerable, where I could explore my feelings and think about my feelings and try to work through them, not just retell them, but try to like move through them in a way. So how do I deal with it? If it feels too vulnerable, I don't share. Like I don't share the work. So there are poems that like maybe only one other person has ever seen. So that would be my wife now, my second wife. And then sometimes it feels important to share work that's really vulnerable if I'm with an audience that maybe needs to hear the kind of thing that I'm talking about. And it's rewarding being vulnerable and sharing myself with other people and sharing my experiences with other people. I'm often met warmly, you know. And so I think I used to be afraid that I would be hurt if I was vulnerable. And I had a therapist who pointed out that I was being hurt anyway. She was like, it hurts anyway. So maybe try being vulnerable. And it was one of the best and hardest things that I've ever done. It took a long time to get comfortable with it. But thank you for seeing that in the work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I want to mention that there is a group of students in Veracruz. It's one of the states of Mexico. It's another American space, so you may say hello to them and encourage to.
Hello,
Yes.
students in Veracruz.
Yes. Any other question here? Comment?
Hi.
Hello.
I want to ask you about you have any favorite place for doing your poem?
Like a favorite place to write? I like to write on my couch. Like at home. I like to write at night. That's your question, yeah? I like to write at night, like 11 o'clock at night till 1 in the morning. Like that's when I enjoy writing. So I can't do it when I'm working my regular job. But yeah, like at night, the house is quiet, my brain is finally quiet. I just learned this, so I have a narrator, like I'm in my brain when I'm not even thinking, it's just like it's always going. It's just going, like describing things all the time, noticing things all the time. And I just found out not everybody has that. So there are some people where I don't know they don't have a constant stream of narration. But for me in the evening, it finally gets quiet enough that I can write, like I can sneak past it and like do my writing. But I love writing on the couch. That's one of my favorite places to do. My wife writes in her office. And she has like a treadmill, you know, like to walk on. She has a treadmill under her desk. And sometimes she'll be walking and then typing. I don't know what's wrong with her. She's like, it's not enough to just be writing. We also need to get our steps in. But thank you for that question.
You mentioned yesterday that after an event that we have in UNAM, then you got to your room and you wrote a poem.
I did, and I sat in the bed. I wrote it in the bed. I don't know, I think I like to, earlier today, Christopher Merrill, who's the director of the International Writing Programs at Iowa, at the University of Iowa, who has helped coordinate this wonderful event, this trip. He showed a clip we listened to a little bit of an actor reading Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, just the first part. And in it, Whitman says, I lean and loaf. And I like to lean and loaf. You know, just like this. This is how I like to write. And it's not good for my back, but it's what I like to do. Do you have a question?
They do.
We have someone
They
here.
do.
Yeah. I thought you did.
It was hard at first of making poetry. I mean, it was hard for you to express your feelings at first.
Yeah, at first, all of my poems, I started writing poems when I was 16. So the early poems were all very, very small, like maybe like 6 lines. And it was just like, I'm sad. Like that was, and I mean, that was how I felt. So I was just like, I'm sad. And then it was very vague. It was very general. And I showed it to my teachers in high school. I have really great teachers, literature teachers, English teachers. And they said, these are wonderful. And now I think they were lying to me. They did not tell me the truth. But they were very, very encouraging. And because they were encouraging, I thought, oh, maybe I could keep doing this. Like maybe I could write more things. And I've been writing for about 23 years, which is weird. Like, what is time? But I've been writing for about 23 years. And it's not easier necessarily, but it is like to express myself and my feelings, right? And to be vulnerable. It's not necessarily easier, but it's more specific. So it's like I had lots of animals, I'm like, oh, maybe it's like this god, or like maybe I can bring in a squirrel. Like I just like want to bring in like lots of other things to sort of make it more specific. And so they are now longer than 6 lines. Yeah.
How did you express your feelings like the same way you feel in the paper?
Mm-hmm.
How do you make that?
That's a great question. Thank you. Part of it is magic. So I don't know. Like I literally have no idea. But the other part is that I try not to say I'm sad anymore. I try to show, right, through the experience that the speaker in the poem is having, that she is sad. So that means describing where she is. That means using specific words. It really means sort of focusing on the feeling and experience and then trying to communicate that. But I actually don't know. And I think anyone who is like a poet who says they do know, they are not telling you the truth. They don't know. Because it's very strange. Have you written any poems? In school? Yeah. It's fun to write them outside of school where no one else will see them. And you don't have to turn them in. I think for me, I just try to be curious about how I'm feeling and what that might be connected to. Or is there something that can show something, right? That can show the feeling better than I can say it. So another example is in Greek mythology. There's a hierarchy. So at the top of the hierarchy is Zeus, right? He's the king of the gods. And then there are like his siblings. His wife is also his sibling, but it's fine. And so you have like Zeus, the king of the gods. Hades is somewhere, so he's in charge of the underworld. And there's Poseidon, who's in charge of the oceans. And then you have the major gods, and then you have demigods, and then you have like some creatures, and then you have people and animals. Like we're all just like the people and animals are like way down here together. And what's important, I use Greek mythology a lot. I've used it to express feelings. I turn to Greek mythology because the Greek gods, the ones at the top, they can do anything to people. And there's nothing that like humans can do really to protect themselves or to push back against the gods. Like humans just don't have the same power, right? So they're very vulnerable to whatever it is that the gods do. So in my family, my dad was like a god, right? So he's at the top. And then I would say it was like my mom, but also just like, it was like men and boys, and then women, and then girls. So girls were at the bottom. So anybody up here could do anything to girls and nothing would happen to them. And instead of saying it like that, I was like, let's talk about these Greek gods, right? So I'm just like, let me give it to them, and they can help me understand my feeling better. So sometimes it's helpful to use a story, or to use like another system of power to explain how we might be feeling right now. At least for me, like that felt really helpful, and helped me eventually be able to say, oh, right, so in my family, it's like my dad was a god, and he could do anything to us, and nothing would happen to him, you know? But I sometimes think it makes more sense to people if I say Zeus than people, you know? So that's one of the strategies that I've used a lot, is giving it to another story to kind of, like, I'll work it out over there. Yeah. But thank you for your question. Other questions? Y'all are fantastic.
So, hi, I have a question. Have you ever thought, I don't want to write poems anymore? And why?
Have I ever thought I don't want to write poems anymore? Yeah. I've never thought that. Never? No. Well, okay, that's not true. When I was 11, I wrote a poem, and it upset my mom. So I tore the poem up, and I threw it away. And I was like, oh, I won't write poems anymore. And when I was in the 10th grade, one of the assignments, so this was high school, one of the assignments was to write a poem. And I wrote a poem, and I was in class, and the teacher asked me to read it, and I just started crying. I was just like weeping in class, and she was like, okay, you don't have to read it. And I was like, whew. But then a couple of years later, I started writing. And I think from that point on, there hasn't been like a time in my life since then where I thought, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I really love it. Like, I love poems. I love writing them. I really like my own work a lot. Like we were talking earlier, I was like, I'm always going to be very excited about my work. So even if like I'm so glad all of you are here. I was like, if 2 people showed up, I would still just be like, yep, these poems are good. So because I connect to my work in that way, it gives me something that I can't really get anywhere else. It's like, it's one of the oldest ways I know how to be in the world. Yeah. Is there a second part to your question?
Yes, there is another one. Mm-hmm. Do you have any tip to say to someone that wants to start writing poems?
Say it one more time.
Do you have any tip to say to someone that wants to start writing poems?
Yeah, do it. Write poems. Everyone should write poems. Maybe 3 things. 1, don't worry about it being good. It doesn't have to be good. And you don't have to show it to anybody. You don't have to show your work to anybody. And 3, try to be weird, right? Like, be very strange. Like, there's a way that you see the world that is specific to you, right? Can you show us that? So like in my poems, like, there's just like a lot of animals. And I could say, oh no, like that's too, we don't need all these animals. And I think, no, that's me. Like, that's a part of like what I love about like being in the world, is getting to look at the other creatures that are here alongside us. Like, that's important to me. That's what I would say. I would say, don't worry about the poems being good. Oh, there's a 4th thing. So don't worry about the poems being good. You don't have to share them with anyone. Be weird. And read poets. It'll help your work get better. But if you're like, I just want to write poems, Julie, just do it. Do you want to write poems? Yeah, do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions? Oh, yeah. Fantastic.
If you had the opportunity to tell something that you didn't tell to one person that you don't talk right now, would you tell them? I mean, with poems, obviously?
Yeah, I've definitely used poems I might not use a poem to say something to someone else, but I will use a poem, like the writing of a poem, to understand how I feel about something. It helps me understand how I feel. And then once I understand more about how I feel, then it's easier to talk to the person who I've written about, right? So I think, oh no, this would be too hard to say. Let me write it. Let me think about it in this way. So it's like, oh yeah, like, and again, like we can be like, oh yeah, now the bear is walking through the woods and the bear is lonely and the bear is looking for love. You know, I'm not the bear. Who is this bear? I don't know her, right? But then like sort of working out sort of something that feels sort of stuck inside, like writing it down, then I can look at it and I can think, oh, how do I really feel about this? And if it's about someone else, sometimes like I like to give love poems to people. I do like that. To be like, I love you. Here, I wrote this about my feelings for you. My wife, I used to, like I still do, I write her love poems. But I was like, I wrote this poem about you. I wrote this love poem about you. And one time she looked at me and she said, this poem is about you. And I was like, oh, no, yes. It absolutely was about me. And so I just like changed. I'm like, this is a poem that I wrote about my feelings for you. And then now she just says, thank you. But she doesn't let me get away with being like, this is about you. It's like, nope. She's like, no. So you can use poems to sort of think through feelings a little bit or feel out experience a little bit. And then you can share the feeling with the other person or another person if you are so moved. Thank you. You're welcome.
Can you tell us how you start writing your poems? How do you start drafting them? What type of things do you do first to get prepared to write?
When I was a younger person, many, many, many years ago, I needed to know what the poem was about, and I needed a title, and I wanted a first line before I would start writing. It's a lot of requirements that can get in the way of actually writing. I'm like, oh, I need all this stuff to happen first. So now what I do is, so an example, let me give you an example. A couple of years ago, it was winter in Iowa, which is very cold. It was maybe, I don't even know what it would be. It's like below zero. Like so cold, windy, snow. And I was like, I hate this. I was like, I want to write a poem. I knew I wanted to write. And I thought, well, it's cold outside and I don't want to write about being cold. I want to write about summer. This was my process. I was like, what do I think about when I think about summer? And the answer was Arkansas, like where I grew up, where I went to high school and college. And then I said to myself, well, when I think about Arkansas, what do I think about? I was like, oh, my great-grandma. And I was like, oh, I'm going to write a poem about my great-grandma. What are things that my great-grandma said or did that felt interesting? So I was just kind of like feeling around inside myself. I was like, what's in here? What's in this box? What's in my great-grandma box, you know? And she was very funny. She was very sweet. And I could stay with her anytime I wanted while she was alive. And she died when I was in my late 20s. So I got to know her for a long time. And so that poem felt really wonderful to write. Sometimes I think, oh, I want to write a love poem to my friend. And then I have to try to imagine, I have to think about things about my friend that can go into the poem. But occasionally, some poems just come from what I call and think of as the magic place, where it just arrives. And I'm like, where did this come from? And there's no way to explain it. There's no way to sort of parse it out. Things just, occasionally we're lucky and they just come. But I do, like I get ready, I have my notebook or my computer, I've started poems on my phone, which is what a lot of the young people do. You do that? You start writing on your phone? I have done it a little bit, and I was like, I don't know about this, but okay, because I didn't have paper. And I was like, let me get to my notebook very fast. Like, let me get this onto paper. And I just like try to be curious, and I try to just like keep pushing into the poem, not stopping before. Sometimes like it will feel a little challenging, and I think I just want to stop. Maybe I'll write something else, and I think no, you're not showing up for the work. So I try to show up for the work. And there's maybe one other part of the answer to this. Sometimes I think I know where the poem wants to stop, or I think I know what the poem wants to do. Like there are things that I like, and I think the poem should do the things that I like. But poems do the poems want other things sometimes. So a lot of what I've been doing, like I would say the last 10 years, is just trying to pay attention to what the poem wants to do, which is weird. And nice, like it's been really wonderful. So I'm just like trying to let go of having so much control and just trying to like attend to what the poem seems to want, if that makes sense. Thank you for that question.
Is there an author that you will recommend to teenagers to start with poetry or literature in general?
I'm thinking of who I read when I was a younger poet. There's the poet. So I read a lot of. There's this poet, black poet, named Maya Angelou. I think in the book that you have, like she's one of the poets. She was when I was a teenager at the schools that I went to. They were always giving us poems by her, and they're just like so powerful and so affirming. And I really enjoyed her work when I was a teen. I would say Sandra Cisneros was also a really wonderful poet for me because her work was clear and open, but like kind of like the feelings were kind of messy. So I was like, oh, what's going on in here? And let me see. There's another poet floating around in my mind. There's this poet, Gary Soto, S-O-T-O, and I really loved his work. Again, like a poet who is clear. I didn't feel like he was trying to trick me. What was happening was what was happening. That's the other thing about reading poetry is sometimes we're taught that there's like a right way to read a poem. There's a correct way. And there isn't. There's just reading the poem and experiencing it. You know, like if you don't understand everything that's happening, but you like the way it sounds, that's a valid way to experience and enjoy poetry. If you don't like the way it sounds, but you like what it says, that's a great way to experience poetry. If you like the shape of it, what is her name? There's a poet, her name is Mary Ellen Solt, S-O-L-T, and she has these concrete poems, so they're poems in a shape. And there's this poem called Forsythia, and it's shaped like the plant Forsythia, but it's just each line that sort of moves like this is the word Forsythia. And that's one of my favorite poems. Like, I don't know what it means, but I like it. It feels very exciting to me, like when I see work like that. So that's the other thing. I would say, like, there are the poets to read, but then there's a way of reading that you don't have to, like, solve the puzzle. You can just experience the work. And however you experience it, like, that's valid. If you're, like, being with the poem. Not if you're like, I don't like this. And you just, like, push it off the table. Don't do that. Any other questions or thoughts? Ideas? Yes.
Hello, I'm Andoni. how about the formal way to write poems, poetry? For example, at school they told us about the metrics and the how it's the rhythm, rhythm and the end that has
Rhyme.
to rhyme with, and but I guess it sometimes makes us to get far from the real experience of writing. So, but I don't know what when I try to write something, it's very squared, like following these rules. But I think this it doesn't express completely what I want to express.
So there's this poet, her name is Denise Levertov, and she has this essay in which she's talking about how the kinds of poems that you describe are poems that have a resolution. They're supposed to sort of be tidy, like have a clean ending, right? Sort of wrapped up in a little bow at the end, right? So they have resolution. And she says that poems like that don't necessarily work for us in our contemporary time, like when we're writing. That there are, I think for some people, closed form where there's rhyme and meter, where there is like a specific shape. I think for some people that kind of constraint means that they can play in a different way. But if it doesn't serve you, you can let it go. You can do whatever you want. You don't have to rhyme. You don't have to follow meter. But you might find that there are some things, like maybe you want to have the rhyme, but you don't want to have the meter. Or maybe you want to have the meter, but you want to let the poem sort of move without rhyming. You can absolutely do that. And that is a valid way of writing poetry. So there are like the formal elements. And for me, those elements begin to feel interesting when I have something to write about that goes in that shape. Like if there's like something that feels resolved, then I might want to put it in something that's more formal. But most of the time I'm just like writing about my feelings. And they are not resolved, like they're messy. So the poems, you know, like they have, I think I can show you a little bit. There is actually a tidiness in my work, but, you know, so like it can just sort of be on the page however it needs to be on the page, right? I don't have to make a box. It doesn't have to just be square. I do like squares though. Like I do like them. Sometimes it's nice to just like have the box and then I can just like bounce in the box. But if it's not useful, you can put it down. Yeah. But thank you. Yeah, I think if it doesn't feel good, you can stop. Yeah. Other questions?
No.
Were there questions in the chat at all? Or it's okay.
No,
if not.
they are just saying hello from
Oh, yeah.
Veracruz.
Excellent, excellent. Hello
Yes.
again, Veracruz.
No, any other question?
Hi.
Hello.
I do have one. Well, you mentioned that sometimes you write, I mean, you use handwriting instead of a computer, and that was one of my questions. But it is also related to technology. That I think that the arts, music, you know, writing, poetry, whatever, those kind of things are gonna keep us from driving ourselves crazy. I mean, humankind. So what do you think about poetry, writing, that way of expressing, I mean, yourself or ourselves, but combined with technology, new technologies now with artificial intelligence and things like those, that I think that writing is a very nice way to express your ideas, and if you can do it through poetry, that's even better. But you know,
Yeah.
How do you think we are going to interact with that?
Mm.
And is that going to help what you do or not?
That's a great question. When I think of the art that moves me, it's art that's made by people. I'm not interested in what a computer feels. Like, I don't care. Until we're right next, like we're doing things together. You know, the robots become sentient, like they come to life. I don't think we're there yet. I think we're pretty far away from that. So I do have like some colleagues who worry about students using AI or the chat bots to write poems and I think that's not my business. Like poetry requires attention. It requires that we be present in the world. It requires to some extent, a measure of vulnerability, even if that's just like sharing our thoughts. Maybe not our feelings, but our thinking. And I'm not so interested in that coming from a computer. Like I don't care about that. I think there are other people who feel differently, who feel like they want to play around with that, but I'm not one of them. I like writing poems by hand when that feels possible. I type them often. And my experience of typing poems, like to start a new poem on the computer, is really different than starting one writing by hand. When I write poems by hand, I will often rewrite the poem several times. But when I type it, I don't do that. So I'm not interacting with the work with the same kind of intensity or with the same kind of focus. And that's fine, like that's okay. I like those poems that come out of just typing in like a word processing document. But those poems also are freer because I feel like I can just kind of feel around in a different way and I can sort of see what the words look like next to each other. My handwriting is very bad. It's like chicken scratch. So it's hard to know what anything looks like until I type it. So sometimes typing feels a bit clearer than writing it out by hand. But I love writing. I love writing by hand. It feels the most. It feels the most connected to my brain. Like I can't go too fast because I can't write that fast. So I like the limitation. And I think the more things that we can do that are analog or at least aren't relying on computers and chatbots, the better we'll be connected to each other. I think some of those devices sort of separate us from each other. They can bring us together for sure, but I do think that they can sometimes create this sort of measure of separation that makes it difficult to connect. So when I'm sitting in a classroom with students and we're all writing like by hand, like that feels really different even than when we're all typing, because sometimes when they're typing, well, now there's an email notification, or now they want to look at Instagram, or now, you don't have that when you're writing in your notebook. Like there are no ads in the notebook. There are no notifications in the notebook. So I like to, I let my students most of the time, like they do what, I'm like, write however you want to write in the way that you want. But sometimes I say, we're gonna write by hand. And they're like, oh. But it's good for them. So it's good for me. Thank you for that question. Oh, there's one here.
How can we exercise metaphors? Because when I write, I think I write very literal. I don't think it's not. I think it's not so with some how would it say with lot of imagination. It's only like telling literally what I feel or a story or something like that.
My recommendation is to read people who do metaphor the way you want to do it. So like you're not doing it right now, that's okay, but if you want to change, like I don't know like what kind of metaphors you want to make. But if there's another writer who is, and it can be a songwriter, it doesn't have to be a poet, right? But if there's another writer who sort of brings things together in a way that surprises you, like read them and then try to do what they do. So there's this poet, critic, translator, Anne Carson. She is so strange. And there's this book, Autobiography of Red, which is, I just taught this book. And her images in this book are very, very strange. So there's a scene where one of the characters gathers so this is the language she uses, like he gathered his grandmother to him like snow. So he like gathers his grandmother to him like snow. And I was like, what does that even mean? Like I can almost imagine like if you're holding snow, I guess like it might start to fall, so you want to like kind of really hold it close. So maybe that's how he was holding his grandmother. But it's such a strange connection. Like she's willing to bring together things that don't seem connected to each other. And reading her, like I asked my student, I'm like, just try to like be as out there as she is. So when you read, it can really, like reading people can really provide a guide for how to do the kind of work that you want to do. Like find people who are doing something similar to what you want to do, and then just practice. Like try to do the thing that they're doing. That would be my recommendation. I don't know. I wouldn't be the poet I am without reading and without other poets. Like to be in conversation, to be in lineage, to inherit lines of thinking from them. I just like feel so grateful for that. So reading is really, really, really important. So if you want to change something, just find that person who's doing the thing and just like try to figure out how they do it.
We have a question from Facebook from Celita Hernandez. Is inspiration necessary to write literature?
No. If we waited for inspiration, we would it's very limiting. I think desire, which is different from inspiration, the desire to write, can be enough of a momentum. Wanting to do it and then feeling one's way into it, right? Like trying to find, like, why do I want to write about this? What is the story in here? What is the story I'm telling myself that I want to get rid of, right? That I want to take out of my life. And then practice. So if we practice, I want to say like maybe Mary Oliver, I mean lots of poets have said this, like this I think is a common refrain among writers. But if you are practicing, if you're writing often, they say every day, I'm not an everyday poet, but I have been writing for a long time now. But if you practice, if you're reading and you're imitating and you're learning new techniques and you're trying things out, then when when inspiration strikes, you're ready. But if you just wait for inspiration to come, you're not actually going to get enough practice in to be ready to actually make something out of that inspiration. So it's important to stay in the gym. It's important to keep doing the drills, like to keep the training going. And that's even when you don't have something specific to write or you don't have that inspiration.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No more questions? No?
All right.
Well, thank you, Donika.
you.
Thank you, Christopher, for coming. Thank you for going to Cervantino, for doing these programs here in the library in Museo UNAM. And hope you come back. And you said in the morning that next time you will be speaking in Spanish.
Sentences.
Okay,
Whole
sentences. Yes, sentences. Okay. Well, thank you. Gracias por venir. Thank you, guys. Thank
Gracias.
you. Veracruz, a los que nos están viendo, gracias.